The studio lights burned brightly, casting an almost unreal glow upon the set as the cameras rolled and the audience murmured with anticipation. The energy in the room was thick, as though every breath carried the weight of expectation. Kevin Hart had entered with his trademark smile, yet beneath the charm there was a visible tension that even casual viewers could sense. He greeted the hosts with a quick nod, his words flowing swiftly as always, but there was an edge of sharpness that hinted at something simmering beneath the surface. Whoopi Goldberg sat across from him, leaning forward with that unmistakable blend of curiosity and authority. Her tone carried the calm of experience, but her eyes searched for weakness. She began with light questions about his career, his comedy, his upcoming projects, and Kevin answered smoothly, though his laughter rang hollow. The audience laughed politely, yet a few noticed the stiffness in his shoulders. Then came the shift, the moment when banter turned into challenge. Whoopi pressed harder, raising issues of accountability and controversy, her words layered with both respect and pointed critique. Kevin shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasping together tightly. His smile faltered only for a fraction of a second, but it was enough to signal the change in the air. The crowd went silent, as if sensing that the conversation had drifted into dangerous waters. No one expected this encounter to unfold in such a way, and yet every second that passed drew them deeper into a clash that seemed inevitable. The atmosphere inside the studio grew heavier as the seconds ticked by. Kevin Hart leaned back in his chair, his eyes darting briefly toward the audience as though searching for an anchor, yet none was found. Whoopi Goldberg pressed her words with deliberate precision, each sentence crafted like a chisel striking stone. She spoke of responsibility, of the power that comes with influence and the consequences that follow when humor collides with controversy. Kevin forced a chuckle, but his voice wavered slightly, betraying the storm brewing within him. He tried to deflect, turning the conversation toward his successes, his philanthropy, his struggles that shaped his career, but Whoopi remained steadfast, unflinching as she leaned closer, her tone unyielding. The crowd shifted in their seats, murmurs rising and falling like waves against the shore. The tension was palpable, every eye fixed on the exchange, every ear straining to catch each syllable. Kevin adjusted his jacket, straightened his posture, and raised his voice, but the laughter he tried to summon felt brittle, fragile like glass under pressure, and when Whoopi responded, her words cut deeper, not cruel but piercing with the weight of truth. The clash between them no longer felt like an interview but a duel of wills, each refusing to yield. The air vibrated with confrontation, and the audience sat enthralled, unable to look away. The silence that followed was deafening, and it stretched across the studio like a shadow. Kevin Hart felt the weight of every gaze pressing into him, and though his instinct was to respond with quick wit, his usual armor of humor seemed to falter in this arena. Whoopi Goldberg did not blink, her eyes steady and unwavering as if she had been here many times before. Her voice carried the calm certainty of someone who knew the truth she wanted to hear and would not stop until it was spoken. Kevin shifted again, his hands restless upon the table, his grin flickered across his face, but it no longer seemed genuine. It was a shield cracking under the strain. He spoke of growth, of learning from mistakes, of becoming stronger, but his words felt rehearsed. The crowd sensed it, and the murmurs grew louder like a storm gathering at sea. Whoopi leaned back slightly, but her presence filled the space around her. She spoke of honesty, of facing criticism without hiding behind charm, and Kevin bristled, his chest rising as he prepared to fire back. His words came rapid, filled with passion but lacking the ease that usually defined him, his tone edged with defensiveness. The clash of voices hung in the air, not angry but sharp enough to cut through the tension. The audience was transfixed, caught in the collision of two strong personalities who refused to retreat. Each sentence felt like a step closer to an eruption, and no one knew how long the fragile balance could hold before breaking apart. The clash reached a sharper edge as Kevin Hart leaned forward, his voice rising with intensity, his words quick and unrelenting like waves crashing against a cliff. Yet Whoopi Goldberg held steady, her calm demeanor unmoved by the force of his delivery. She listened without flinching, and when she spoke her tone was lower but stronger, every syllable landing with precision and weight. The crowd leaned closer, sensing the escalation, their breaths held in collective suspense. Kevin gestured with his hands, his eyes wide with frustration, trying to reclaim control of the narrative, but the harder he pushed, the more Whoopi anchored herself in poise. She reminded him of responsibility, the responsibility of words, of influence, of the way comedy can shape thought and harm even when unintended. Kevin shook his head, his laughter brief, sharp, and without joy. The usual rhythm of his charm disrupted and replaced by unease. He tried again to redirect the conversation to lighter ground, but each attempt was intercepted by Whoopi, who drew the dialogue back to accountability. The air was heavy now, almost suffocating. The studio lights seemed hotter, the audience quieter, their energy bottled throttled in anticipation of what might come next. It was no longer an interview but a battle of resolve, one driven by fiery defense, the other by unwavering conviction, and in that moment everyone watching knew the encounter had surpassed entertainment. It had become a test of character played out in real time with no script to follow. The moment stretched with unbearable weight. Kevin Hart shifted once more, his body restless as though every movement was a silent plea for escape. His words came louder now, his tone sharpened like steel meeting stone. He spoke of his struggles, his rise from hardship, his battles with doubt and failure, and how laughter had been his weapon, his shield, his gift to the world. But Whoopi Goldberg met him not with ridicule but with unyielding presence. She nodded at his words, but her silence spoke louder than any applause. It was a silence that demanded truth, not performance. Kevin felt the heat of that silence pressing against him like a wall. His usual rhythm, his ability to disarm any challenge with a joke, was unraveling thread by thread. He clenched his fists on the table and tried again to defend his choices, his legacy, his identity as an artist, but each sentence, though passionate, seemed to stumble under the weight of scrutiny. The audience could feel the fracture forming, the image of invincible confidence cracking before their eyes. Whoopi leaned in, her voice steady, almost gentle but piercing. She spoke of growth not as a shield but as a process, of facing flaws openly, of accepting criticism not as attack but as opportunity. Kevin looked away for a moment, his eyes narrowing, his chest rising and falling heavily. The crowd sat frozen, knowing they were witnessing not just an argument but a revelation, a confrontation that pierced beyond comedy into the soul of accountability. The energy in the room shifted like a storm cloud rolling overhead. The laughter and casual chatter that once defined the atmosphere had vanished, replaced by silence that echoed louder than applause. Kevin Hart leaned forward, his face taut with frustration. His words carried urgency but also an edge of desperation. He wanted control, he wanted to reclaim the narrative, yet the more he spoke the more Whoopi Goldberg countered with calm assertion. Her voice never rose but each phrase cut deeper into the fragile armor he wore. She spoke of influence, of the ways his choices reverberated beyond the stage of comedy into homes and lives of people who looked to him not only for humor but also for guidance. Kevin shook his head, his hand rubbing the back of his neck as though trying to shake away the weight that had settled upon him. He fired back about intention, about the difference between what a comedian says and how the world twists it, but his words, though passionate, seemed to echo hollowly against the walls of accountability. The audience leaned forward, their eyes wide, their bodies unmoving, as though afraid to disturb the fragile balance unfolding before them. The clash no longer felt like an exchange of views but a deeper unraveling of identity and pride. Kevin's smile tried to surface but it slipped again like a mask, unable to stay fixed. Whoopi watched without malice but with an unshakable demand for sincerity, and the tension pressed upon every breath drawn in that studio. The crowd inside the studio could feel the confrontation deepening every second as Kevin Hart leaned back and then forward again like a fighter unable to find the right stance. His voice poured out with a mix of defiance and pleading. He insisted that comedy had always been his way to bring light, that laughter was meant to heal not to harm, but his words, though loud, trembled with the strain of defending ground that seemed to shrink beneath him. Whoopi Goldberg answered with the steadiness of stone, her words deliberate, measured yet unyielding. She reminded him that laughter carries power and power always demands responsibility. Kevin exhaled hard, his shoulders tightening as if the weight of her reasoning pressed him further into the chair. He clapped his hands together and gestured wildly, searching for applause to validate his stance, but the audience remained quiet, their silence ringing sharper than any jeer. His charm flickered briefly as he cracked a joke, desperate to shift the energy, yet the laughter that followed was thin, scattered like a breeze through dry leaves, and the hollowness of it only deepened the moment. Whoopi leaned closer, her eyes never leaving his. She spoke of legacy, of how history remembers not only the laughs but also the wounds left unhealed. Kevin swallowed, his voice softer now but still resisting the tide. He argued that growth was possible, that mistakes should not define him, but the struggle was evident, his words clashing against the walls of expectation, and the audience remained caught in the electric current of conflict. The intensity within the studio grew heavier with each passing heartbeat. Kevin Hart sat upright, his eyes flashing with determination as if daring the silence itself to challenge him again. His voice poured into the room, carrying layers of frustration, pride and vulnerability. He spoke of sacrifice, of the long nights, the countless battles he had fought to climb from obscurity to global recognition. His words painted the image of resilience, a man who had carried the burden of expectations and delivered laughter through storms. Yet Whoopi Goldberg did not retreat, her calm gaze never wavered, her body leaned ever so slightly forward as though her very presence carried more weight than the heated words hurled across the table. She spoke of truth, of the courage required not only to perform but to admit fault, to accept that greatness is measured not by applause but by the willingness to confront failure. Kevin clenched his jaw, his hand slapping gently against the table as though to emphasize his defense. He spoke Faster now, words tumbling from him like water rushing down a broken dam, yet the urgency betrayed the cracks in his composure. The audience sat frozen, some leaning closer, others holding their breath as if fearing they might miss the moment. The duel between pride and accountability unfolded like theater, yet it was painfully real. The silence between their sentences felt louder than thunder, and every eye remained locked upon them, knowing they were watching more than an argument, they were watching a defining moment unravel before them. The confrontation pressed onward with the weight of inevitability. Kevin Hart lifted his chin, his voice echoing with renewed defiance, as though he had decided that retreat was no longer an option. He declared that his art was born from pain, that comedy had been his way to rise above struggle, and that no critic could strip away the truth of that journey. His words rushed forward like a storm, filled with conviction, yet each sentence seemed to carry a tremor, as if the foundations beneath were unsteady. Whoopi Goldberg listened with unbroken focus, her eyes steady, her hands folded calmly upon the table. She waited, allowing the silence between his declarations to stretch like a mirror, forcing reflection. When she finally spoke, her tone was measured, her cadence unhurried. She reminded him that comedy is not only personal, it is collective. It echoes into lives far beyond the stage, and those echoes can wound as deeply as they can heal. Kevin shifted uneasily, his shoulders tense, his laughter bursting out suddenly sharp and brittle, a defense that fooled no one. The audience watched in rapt attention, their silence thick with expectation, as if they were holding witness to something larger than a disagreement. Kevin tried to turn the tide, his words spilling faster, a desperate attempt to reshape perception, yet every time he reached for levity, the weight of Whoopi's words dragged the moment back into gravity. It was a duel of fire and stone, passion clashing with composure, and the tension between them seemed ready to shatter the very air within the studio.